The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. Hello, I'm Vicki Healy from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, which is hosted by the Clean Energy Solutions Center in partnership with the International Support Network for African Development, Africa, supporting the Mentoring for Research program. And today's webinar is focused on the essential skills for effective mentoring relationships. Before we begin, I'll quickly go over some of the webinar features for you. For audio, we have two options. You may either listen through your computer or over your telephone. If you choose to listen through your computer, please select the mic and speakers option in the audio pane. If you choose to dial in by phone, please select the telephone option, and a box on the right side will display the telephone number and an audio pin you should use to dial in. If anyone is having technical difficulties with the webinar, you may contact the GoToWebinars Help Desk in the United States at 888-259-3826 for assistance. Before I continue to the next slide, could I have one of the presenters just verify that you can hear me and see my screen? Peter, are you able to hear me and see my screen?
Yes, I hear you. I'm not sure I see your screen, though.
All right, just a moment. Let's see. Are you able to see it now?
Yep, got it.
Okay, very good. Thanks. So I will continue. A few more housekeeping items. If you would like to ask a question, you may do so by using the questions pane on your screen to type in your question. And I would like to let you know a recording of this webinar will be added to the Solutions Center YouTube channel in just a few days, where you can go and explore not only this webinar recording, but many other informative webinars and videos on a range of clean energy topics. Also, I will email you PDF files of today's presentations with a web link to the recording. So watch for an email from me in about a week. It takes a few days to process the recording. So I appreciate your patience and thank you for your patience in advance. Just quickly, the agenda for today. Today's webinar agenda is centered around presentations from our guest panelists, Dr. Peter Sheard and from Ms. Dami Paquito, who will join us today to discuss the essential skills for effective mentoring relationships. Excuse me. Before we jump into their presentations, I will provide a quick overview of the Clean Energy Solutions Center. And then following all three of our presentations, we will have a question and answer session where our panelists will address questions submitted by you, the audience. And then at the end of the webinar, you will be automatically prompted to fill out a brief survey as well. So again, I'd like to thank you in advance for taking a moment to respond to our survey. Now just a little bit about the Clean Energy Solutions Center. The Solutions Center was launched in 2011 under the Clean Energy Ministerial. So the Clean Energy Ministerial is a very high-level global forum that was established to promote the advancement of clean energy technologies and also to encourage the transition to a global clean energy economy. There are 24 countries and the European Commission that are members of the Clean Energy Ministerial. And these countries contribute 90% of clean energy investment worldwide, but they are also responsible for 75% of the global greenhouse emissions. The Solutions Center has a very specific focus in that we help government policymakers design and adopt policies and programs, and also to utilize finance measures that support the deployment of clean energy technologies. This is accomplished through providing policy assistance through a team of more than 50 experts, and also peer learning and training tools such as this webinar. The Clean Energy Solution Center is co-sponsored by the governments of Australia, Sweden, and the United States, and we also receive in-kind support from other countries. The Solution Center is an international initiative, and we work with many, many international partners as well as regional initiatives across the suite of different programs. Several of the partners are listed on the slide. I don't have time to go over the entire list, but they do include global organizations like IRENA, the International Energy Agency, Sustainable Energy for All, and we also work with regionally focused entities such as the ECOWAS Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. So now I'd like to provide a brief introductions for today's panelists. I have detailed bios on these screens, but I'll just briefly refer to them by their name and title so that we have plenty of time to hear their presentations and to also hear back from you during the question and answer session. So today we have the great pleasure of having Dr. Peter Sheard, who is the co-owner and founder of Trend 2000 Limited. Dr. Sheard will speak to us today about persuasive writing skills. And following Peter, we will be hearing from Ms. Dami Pikuda, who will talk to us a bit about the essential skills for effective research communications. And with that, if you could just bear with me a moment, I'd like to turn the controls over to Dr. Peter Sheard. And Peter, when you're ready, you may begin. Give me one moment to turn the controls over to you.
Okay, is that working?
Yes, we can see your screen. Thank you.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Well, good morning everybody, or good afternoon, depending on whereabouts in the world you are. I would like now to spend probably about the next 45 minutes or so trying to explain a little bit about how to have much more effective written communications. And the main focus of what I'm trying to work on today is persuasive writing. And this is a snapshot of a typically 2-day seminar that we provide very often to young researchers, as it happens, who are looking to try to raise funding for their research activities. But this type of initiative runs across many different walks of life, whether you're raising funding for research, whether you're actually just trying to communicate effectively with your bosses at work, or whether you're actually trying to raise finance for purchases such as buying a car or buying a house or whatever. So the basic principles of persuasive writing are very transferable depending on the environment that you're going in. The kind of topics that we're going to cover today are just 3 particular snapshots. The first one, I want to look at persuasive writing, the basics, and some of the straightforward tools that you'll require to be able to start putting these things together for yourself. On the counter side of that, it's getting inside the minds of the person that we're trying to communicate with. And normally when we communicate, it's because we're trying to get somebody to make a decision or to do something that we are trying to get them to do. So understanding the decision-making process is also a very important aspect of being able to persuade people to do things that we're actually asking them to do. And the last section I want to cover is really contextualizing the learning in this particular seminar to again look to see how we can use some of these tools and techniques and knowledge in our own writing so that we can try to improve the way that we communicate ourselves as well. I'd first of all like to put a very big acknowledgement into this presentation to a very good colleague of mine, Peter Frederick. This is a course that he has prepared over many, many years of working with competitive bid writing. And he's also written a book, and I would highly recommend that if you want to really dig into persuasive writing in a lot of detail, that you acquire his book. It's an extremely amusing and funny book to read as well, so it's actually very entertaining as well as being extremely informative. As you've probably already seen, my name is Peter Sheard, and I've spent a vast majority of my career trying to convince people to actually provide funding for research. My technical background is in materials science and engineering, and I also have a BSc in economics. So I cover not only the social sciences, but also the applied sciences areas. And as I mentioned, I've been working on bid writing for many, many years. And through the years, I've been not just preparing the applications, but I've also been running the projects that resulted, and also working with the European Commission to select programs to be funded. So I've seen these processes right the way through, from the applicant's perspective to the selector's perspective, and then on to the person who does the monitoring's perspective. And I try to encompass all of these different perspectives in the writings that I try to suggest you do. Okay, so let's now move on to the basics and the tools. Now, the first thing to be aware of with writing is it's actually not normally considered to be the most effective means of communication. Most of the time you will be dealing with people face to face, and this is a much advantageous situation because you are getting an immediate reaction from the person that you're communicating with, and on that form you can actually adapt what you're saying by watching the body language, and you can then create your own narrative as you're running through. The big disadvantage with writing is that you can only do it once. It's not an interactive process. You are essentially writing symbols on a page and enabling somebody else to interpret those symbols. And if they interpret them in a different way to what you meant, then the chances are you're not going to have a very convincing or persuasive session with that particular individual. On the very plus side, though, with writing, it does give you lots of time to plan how best to do it. So you do have one advantage in your favor. Say time is on your side. You can construct your argument to be as persuasive as possible. The next important thing to try to identify, though, is, of course, why are you writing? If you have to write, then why are you actually doing it? And it's very important to identify the clear purpose of why you're writing. And enable you to do that, you need to try to set some very clear, simple objectives. And you need, as you're writing your text, to be constantly reminding yourself what these objectives are and stay focused on just that one set of objectives. Human beings, we don't have a very long attention span. We get distracted very easily. So if somebody provides a very complicated series of either emails or instructions, we often lose the plot. We don't follow exactly what's going on. And it's quite typical that we will miss a large number of things on single emails or even in larger documents for securing research funding. So key things: identify why you're writing, what's the purpose, set clear, simple objectives, and make sure you stay focused on these. Another very important thing when you're writing, of course, is to actually identify who you're actually writing to. Who is your audience? Once you've identified your audience, you can begin to start to structure your actual strategy for getting the response that you're wanting. Now, in many cases, if you're writing in terms of research applications or in terms of some kind of policy provisions, you can make a good assumption that you are working with what we call an ignorant genius. Very clever, very knowledgeable people, but they might not always be knowledgeable in the specific area that you're particularly dealing with. So again, making an assumption. The next thing, of course, is that most people are rather cynical, particularly if they know you're trying to get them to do something for you. There will be a little voice on their shoulder that's telling them, you can't do that, that's not right, that doesn't make sense. So you have to be careful to, again, recognize what that inner cynic is and how to address that in your writing. As I mentioned before, When you're writing, you are just putting symbols on a page. Your reader, the audience, is the person that creates the meaning from those symbols on that page. And very often the meaning might not actually be what you expected. And the meaning is created by people's experience and indeed some of the biases that they might already have accumulated over their lifetime. So again, this is a very important aspect of making sure that you construct your message in the right way. The other thing to bear in mind is more often than not, your audience has much better things to do than reading what you've provided them to actually look through. Particularly if it's a long document, for example, a research application for funding, you need to do what we call take pity on them. Make it easy for them to read it. Try not to bury lots of information in very obscure parts of the document. Make sure things stand out for them. You also have to bear in mind, particularly for longer documents, that your audience might skim read it. They don't have time to read every single word that you put on the page. And that can be a good thing. On the one hand, it means that it might mean they don't pay as much attention to some of the negative aspects that you might have to present. But it can also be bad because it might mean that they take the wrong impression away if they miss a very key part of your argument and don't find it anywhere else in the document. So there's some pros and cons to skim reading. But also what you're going to find is that most of the time the people reading these will be human beings, and human beings like to be hooked. We like to find something engaging. Most of us love reading books, and therefore the same kind of thing applies. If there's a book you don't like, you won't read it. So the audience is there wanting to be hooked as well. So a key message here is try, if you possibly can, to learn about your audience. Try to research them if you know who they are specifically. Try to picture them in your own mind if you're not really clear who they are, and build some kind of model. Are they well educated? Why are they actually reading my document? Is it because they're an evaluator, or is it because these are a senior person in my organization that I need to get to do something for me? And also, where do they read? Are they reading at home, in their office? Is it a pleasant environment? Is it noisy? So trying to build up some of these ideas. And similarly, if you know these people are extremely cynical or they've got some degree of hostility towards you, again, you can build up some kind of image as to what your audience is like so that you can strategically write in a way that overcomes some of these issues. Perhaps try to establish a best case and a worst case reader. In most cases with research funding, you're going to find that there's a series of people, maybe a panel of 5, of which probably 3 will be quite open-minded and quite easy to convince in a way. And there may be 2 of that panel who are extremely hostile. They're very senior academics, very senior people who perhaps have heard it all before from young researchers saying they can solve problems that perhaps these panelists have spent their whole lives working on. So they're going to be very cynical and not believe most of what is being said. So that's an important thing. Picture your audience, try to find out as much as you can about them. The next thing, of course, is you have to bear in mind you're trying to persuade your audience, not yourself. Hopefully, you're already quite convinced about what you're writing, the purposes and the objectives, and your mission is to put that text in such a way that the audience is able to basically respond and react to them. So remember, you need to adapt your style to suit the audience. And if you're from academia, academic audiences are not really very easy to address with what I call sales type documentation. On the counter side, if you're trying to write a proposal for funding, it's also not really likely that you're going to impress people with pure academic writing. So from a persuasive writing perspective, you need to be more assertive, you need to be more personal, you need to cut out a lot of jargon. And this sometimes goes against how younger researchers are brought up in terms of factual writing in the third person, and clearly in your particular subject discipline, putting in as many large words with lots of jargon as possible. So just some things to bear in mind about your style. Okay, so we've understood a little bit about the reader. We now understand that we need to set and focus and stay focused on some clear objectives. The next thing is actually what response are we actually looking for from our readers? And in many cases, we are looking for an emotional response, and I'll come back to why that is. We also want to be very clear about what kind of response we want them to do. We normally want them to do something as a result of our writing. So we're raising some information that they should take some action about. And a very clear way of trying to raise an intent is if somebody has a reaction to what they're reading and saying, my goodness, that's terrible, I have to do something about it to help the situation. So these are the kind of responses that we try to instill within the readers. And of course, those responses will depend on exactly what we're trying to get people to do for us. But the main thing to try to remember is that reader plus response equals a result. And that's the R plus R equals R, and that's a simple mnemonic to try to remember. In terms of putting that together, we need to be able to clearly instruct the reader about something they would need to do. Need to give them a sense of satisfaction from undertaking an action. So we very often refer to something we call a call to action. And this is really a clear directive to the person reading the document or reading the email, what we would like them to do as a result of reading our email or reading our document. If it's a research proposal, we would like them to fund it or to approve it for funding. So that would be the call for action. And once they've made that decision to do an action, we want them to feel satisfied that it's the right decision. And again, that's a very important aspect of constructing the proposed story in the text that we're writing. There's a flowchart that we use when we're doing persuasive writing, and it's a fairly straightforward area where the elements in blue on this flowchart are relating to your ability to control. Now, knowledge of the reader, that's down to you, that's down to a bit of research. Reason that you're writing, again, there should be a logical argument. You need to be able to convince the person reading that actually there's a need to do something. Respect is an important aspect because, again, if the person reading has no respect for the person who's written the text, then they're not likely really to actually do anything as a result of that. It could just be put into a junk folder or put onto the list of proposals where they don't believe that this can be done and will be rejected. Also, emotion is important, to try to engage emotionally with your reader. And that becomes quite an important part of decision making, as we'll see a little bit later on. And what you want from your reader is the elements in yellow. You want elements in green. You want an emotive response. You want people to actually be able to understand that you are empathizing with their particular issues. The next thing that you need to create is this intent response. So if you've managed to raise an emotional response, then you're going to be able to enlist an intent response from your readers. And then finally, you're in control of a call to action, and ideally your reader is going to take the action that you're calling them to do, and you end up with the result. So again, we're talking about the R plus R equals R. Now, how these elements actually combine together is quite important. We talk about things like ethos. Now, ethos is respect and trust, and your audience must respect and trust you. Otherwise, they're not really likely to take notice of what you're telling them in your writing. So you have to build up some kind of trust, and part of that is also the way in which you do your writing. If you start, for example, in my humble opinion, that's not likely to get you much audience respect. So you have to, again, be very careful with the way you actually undertake the wording. Logos is, again, a word we use for reason. You need to present a logical argument, some degree of plausibility. But unfortunately, we're not as logical as we think we ought to be. Most people would think we're a logical being and we make decisions based on logic. That's generally not true, and we, in general terms, are emotional beings. And emotion is the most powerful persuader for decision making. So the reason, the logic is probably the weakest of the three elements. The respect needs to be there and trust has to be there, but the most powerful is actually making sure that you create an emotional response. So again, reason, respect, and emotion combined equal a reader response, and ideally that is ending up with the result that we're actually trying to achieve. Now, how do we actually create an emotional response? Well, it's down to using emotive words. So we're trying to actually identify words and put them in the text that actually create these emotions. So the first thing, in a way, is actually to try to find out what kind of emotional response we actually want in our audience. And if you've done your research into who is our audience, you might well be able to identify certain things that you know will trigger them. It might well be, for example, that they're senior professors in a certain discipline and they've written certain kinds of papers. So again, trying to create some kind of emotional response linking to their previous research areas might also be a very important way of getting those responses. It's also useful to use what we call emotional words, and there's a whole variety of different types of emotional words creating different types of things. If you're trying to create a message of inspiration, maybe you're going to use words like enthusiastic or motivated. If you're trying to create something relating to people and make sure they're happy and enjoy what you're reading, perhaps you're going to use words like courageous or glorious. If you're trying to make them feel safe and satisfied, perhaps you're going to focus on words like accurate, advantage, and effective. If you're trying to raise some what I call more impactful types of response, perhaps you're going to use words like catastrophic, outrageous, shocking, or tragic, so that you can begin to draw people's emotions out. So this is an important tool and a technique. It's also important to have impactful words as well. So things like loss are important to get across. And if you're trying to get somebody to do something particularly important, then making some kind of immediacy is also important here as well. So in terms of impactful words, trying to explain things that you would be missing out, there's only a limited opportunity to do this. These are also kind of emotive words that have some degree of impact as well. You're also very interested in trying to create a relationship with your reader. You don't want them just to feel very offhand. And this is why it's important to use I, we, and you, as opposed to the general one word or just completely keeping the individuality out of it. So try to bear these things in mind. So work on words like your, and again, try to be helpful in terms of the way you're presenting the text. We also have what we call a number of loaded words in the English language as well, which are often used as polite ways of criticizing. And loaded words can have an advantage in a way, and the typical things are adequate, acceptable, tries, competent. And another one we use an awful lot in English is interesting. Somebody says something's excuse me, interesting, it probably means they're not really sure whether it's interesting or not, but they're just trying not to offend you. So loaded words, again, can be used in a very effective way. But part of choosing the correct words is about the perception you want your reader to have. Now, for example, there's 3 bullet points here. Do you receive accreditation or do you achieve it? Now, if you receive it, it sounds very much like it's just something that's handed out to everybody. But if you achieve accreditation, it means you've earned it. And there's value gone into that. Importantly, it's clear to see that you've actually earned that accreditation as opposed to just being generally handed it out. The next thing is, do you carry out work or do you deliver results? If you just carry out work, well, lots of other people can just carry out work. The key thing is it's you that will be delivering results, and on that basis then you've earned that recognition from the audience. A similar example at the bottom, does a project require effort or expertise? Effort, lots of people are very good at putting in a lot of effort, but you're the specialist in that area, it's your expertise. So that project requires your specific expertise. So again, choosing the best words can again help get your message across very clearly. Now, one of the things as well, which is very important to understand in terms of communication, is that people who are extremely calm, not ruffled at all, will make more logical decisions. What we are trying to do in all the time when we're communicating with people, particularly if we're trying to get them to persuade them into doing something we want, we need actually to put them in a less calm environment. So we need to do something like agitate, set them at an emotional low. Then we can start to empathize once we've identified the problem, and then we can say we understand the problem and the trouble this causes, and then your step 3 is actually, here is my solution. This takes the problem away. So again, it's beginning to develop a kind of a story relating to what you're trying to achieve through your communication. I mentioned before that talking personally is very important. This is just an example from a website that we made up, and read it out. ACE Corp can help you innovate your products and services and help you discover the power of innovation as a business strategy. That's really getting very clear to the point. ACE Corp wants to help you. You're an individual. You're not just one of 100,000 people out there. This particular piece of text is talking to you specifically. Then it goes on to say, ACE Corp provides innovative concept development across industry. We also provide access to over 10,000 scientists and engineers to develop the technology needed to realize these ideas. We can even help you share the costs of innovation through partnership and government support. So this is just an example of making a direct connection with your audience. So it's, again, trying to make sure you keep things personal. It's much more effective on an individual communication level, particularly when you're trying to persuade somebody. Another important thing to bear in mind is that the real importance and significance of storytelling. We all love stories. As I mentioned before, we like reading books. Books will generally have a theme running through them, a storyline. And you can use these for a framework for your written communications as well. And how these effectively work is really trying to identify the storyline. Very often an effective one in communication writing is trying to find out the hero, the villain, the problem you're solving, the good guy that comes along and solves the problems with the good strategy. And that's essentially about what we call developing a storyboard for your text. Why? What's the problem? What's the villain that you're trying to overcome in the story? Who's the bad guy? You hopefully are going to be the hero of the story, but unfortunately you've got a slight flaw. You don't know everything you need to know. So maybe you're seeking information with your communication. Perhaps you're writing a research application and require funding to help you build up the capacity to overcome these slight flaws or lack of knowledge that you have. Then, of course, you need to present your vision. What's your overall view of solving the problem? And then the narrative, very importantly, is going to be identifying the actions that you're going to be taking. And this is the narrative of the book. So again, it's very clear to identify the hero, the problem you're overcoming, and why you need the storyline to actually develop and collect all the various bits and pieces that you need. So again, trying to develop that is very important in terms of your stories. Try to encompass a number of what I call the basic story elements. Who's the hero, the character flaws, who's providing enabling circumstances. You might have allies, you might be working with other people, for example, if you're doing some kind of cooperative project. What's the opponent, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? And of course, jeopardy at the bottom, what's the risk that you're trying to overcome? Why you require action from the reader. So a number of fairly straightforward elements in your your storyboard and storytelling. Okay, so that's a little bit about what I call the fundamentals, the tools and the basics of actually creating an effective story and an effective communication. On the counter side of that, of course, is trying to work out what motivates people to make decisions. So I want to run through now some fairly, what I call psychological information about how we actually make decisions as human beings. The first thing to really be aware of is, of course, that the human brain is really quite a marvelous piece of equipment. It contains something like 20 billion neurons, which run at about 2000 hertz, and it can complete around about 100 million instructions per second. So this is one of the very remarkable natural neural networks. And because of this complexity, this basically enables us to take in and process billions of pieces of information daily, and we use them to make generally life or death decisions. Certainly that was how the brain was developed to do in the past. Now, to enable us to do this, we have to use chemicals. We use things like adrenaline, testosterone, oxytocin, and this will bias or switch decision-making modes. And it comes back to years ago as we were evolving as a species where we had a fight or flight requirement. And these are very unconscious and hard to override, these kinds of developments of these chemicals. Another thing to bear in mind is that the brain doesn't have any way to assess the quality of brand new information. If there's no reference and no benchmark, once new information has come in, then that generally gets filed away and becomes the new benchmark against which things will be compared. The third aspect as well is to make firm, quick decisions. The brain has to have a shortcut process. And basically it uses something we call bias. So it biases the information it receives and also how to use it. And again, these shortcuts are important in evolutionary terms. if you have to make a snap decision about fight or flight, you haven't got half a day to work out what's actually the best requirement. So your brain basically comes in and starts sorting these things out for you. And together these things collectively come together what we call as a cognitive bias. And this is essentially a systematic pattern of deviation from norm or rational behavior in judgment, whereby inferences about other people, other situations can be drawn in an illogical fashion. And this is something that we do all the time. And I think the last time I checked, there's something like over 200 recognized cognitive biases that we all suffer from. Now, these features of the brain also make it susceptible to all kinds of persuasion. So understanding how to use these is also a key aspect to effective persuasive writing. You can understand how people are going to make a decision, then you can basically put into your text the kinds of things that will trigger those particular responses in your readers, so enabling you to dial into some of these cognitive biases. Some of them, of course, are not all positive, and we'll come on to some of the other things that cause problems a little bit later on, but we'll start off with primacy. Coming first absolutely matters. If it's first, it's most likely to be remembered. And try to consider your brain like a funnel. You're pouring information into it, and initially it's going to drip in quite nicely, but eventually the funnel will get clogged up and it will jam and nothing more goes in. And that's very much like how our brains operate. Another thing associated with primacy is, in fact, availability of information. Now, primacy is part of this availability conundrum. It helps you identify very early on what you need to be writing at the beginning of your text, and also we have something called recency, which is the last thing. And that's again why it's always useful to have some kind of summing up paragraphs. And the strength of recency, or the last thing, is also well known, particularly in terms of criminal circles, because it's always the person that will sum up last in a criminal trial who actually ends up normally with a better result, because this is the last thing the jurors hear, and therefore it's something, again, which is going to be more in their mind. So these two things, primacy and recency, are important aspects to get across in your writing. Another aspect is also something we call shocking and surprising. And this is what will pull up information to make it much more available immediately. Give you an example here. Let's say that you've decided that you're going to go and do a charity parachute jump. And you've selected an airfield and a parachute club that's absolutely got 100% record of never having an injury, any kind of problem. And you're up in this aeroplane thinking, oh, this is nice, this is a very safe environment, nobody's ever had any problems here. The person in front of you in the queue to do the jump jumps out of the aeroplane. Parachute doesn't open, whoops, splash, gone. Now, I guarantee you are not going to jump out of that plane, regardless of the fact that there was a 100% safety record. You have now had a big shock, a horrible surprise, and it's unlikely that you're going to be jumping out of that aeroplane now. Same kind of thing when you're writing text. If you can put in some shocking or some surprising information in the text, then that often creates a very good impact on your reader. And how you use that is also quite an important part of constructing good quality persuasive writing text. How can we actually use this? Okay, primacy, good executive summaries. First few lines on a list, also very important. If you've got a longer document and you split it up into lots of paragraphs, again, it's the first few lines on each of these paragraphs, the first few lines on each page that become very important. We talk about availability. You need evaluators or whoever's reading your documents to be able to identify what the important messages are. So good, strong, bold headings, impact boxes, use of things like bullet points and closing statements also are very important for that. Also, the use of hard-hitting statistics and facts. These can generate that shock element that again provide you with that emotional response that we're trying to achieve. A number of other biases that come through that you need to be aware of. We have something called confirmation bias, and this is a tendency to look for evidence that confirms our own existing beliefs. And it's basically people looking for ways to confirm that something is true as opposed to finding out if it's false. Very often researchers get caught into this trap because they develop a hypothesis And their mission, from their perspective, is to prove that their hypothesis is correct. This is a good example of a confirmation bias. It's a much more open way of researching if you actually set out to find out if your hypothesis is correct, not to prove that it's correct, because then you might actually overlook evidence that is proving otherwise. So again, something just to be mindful of. We also have something called cognitive dissonance. Now, this is basically the inability of our brains to hold two conflicting views at the same time. We either like something or we don't like something. It's very unusual that we have a balanced individual who likes and doesn't like something equally at the same measure. Now, basically this means that if you've made a first impression on somebody in your writing and immediately they've said, I don't like this, I'm not sure I trust this person, it's very hard then to get them to change their minds to actually say, I do trust this person now, I think that was just a slight mistake at the start. So again, it's coming down to the importance of making a good first impression so that we don't have this issue with cognitive dissonance where people just generally don't like changing their mind. We like to be consistent. We also have another issue called sunk cost bias. This is essentially where the brain says, well, I've already invested so much time and effort or maybe even money in this particular approach, I don't want to just abandon that and start again. So very often this is something which happens all through life where we're actually thinking, because I've already invested time and money, it could be into a financial, into a project, it could be emotional, into a relationship, we're always trying to maintain sunk cost bias so that we're actually not losing what we've already done. Now, anyone involved in investment decision making will know immediately this is one of the first things that investors are told to actually ignore. Overcome your sunk cost bias. Treat every decision as if this was the first time that you were actually dealing with it. So again, an important one to bear in mind. We also crave rationalization. We crave support for our own opinions. So if we've made a decision, we will actually try to find evidence that proves that actually it was the right decision to make. So we might have gone out shopping and bought a very expensive dress or pair of shoes, for example, come home and then we're going to say, yeah, yes, but they go so well with my new outfit and all these kinds of things, even when there's a little voice on your shoulder saying you shouldn't have done that. It wasn't really affordable at the time. There's always this little voice rationalizing our decision making. So how does that actually come through in real life? Well, let's take an example. Let's put you in an environment. You are working in an organization now where you have a manager and that manager has backed a new product. Maybe it was about a year ago that they put some investment and set this new product up. And unfortunately, it's now got very, very poor sales. And the manager's thought process typically is going to be going through a number of things. The first one, I can't cancel it now. We've invested millions into it. That's a very classic example of a sunk cost bias. Cancelling it will make me look weak and indecisive. That's a consistency bias creeping in. Third issue, sales were probably down due to the very wet weather in May. Trying to rationalise that it's still the right decision because the sales were down because of wet weather. And then confirmation bias number 4, sales are still 20% higher than in January. The fact that January's sales were a disaster anyway is not really helping the issue. So you can see these biases creeping in into the way we think and the way we actually try to either make decisions or support decisions that we've already made. But now let's put yourselves in the situation. He's your manager and you've been told to write a report to try to get him to change his mind, to pull out of this particular investment. The first thing, of course, your manager won't want to be wrong. People just don't appreciate being told that they're wrong. Third thing, he's going to remember selective statistics that support continuation. Remember the rationalization that was being done with the previous sales. So again, you have a problem with that. He also won't want to read the arguments against and won't want to feel that he's wasted time and money. So you've got to try and construct some text to overcome these. So how would you actually go about doing that? Well, the first thing is, manager was not wrong at the time. Maybe you can start working on the basis that circumstances have changed. In the last year, things have changed, which mean that were you making the decision again now, then you would actually make a different decision. So again, focusing on the circumstances is important. So identifying it's not a mistake that was made, it's just simply as time has gone on, things have changed. You also, of course, need to predict the ways that statistics could be misinterpreted and present an alternative view to counter any of this rationalization or confirmation bias that might be going on. You also need to be able to draw the manager into the document by pointing out the optimistic past, so it's going to give him a good feeling about the decision that he made a year ago, but then of course now explaining clearly how things have changed. Then the fifth element is, of course, show the savings that could be made by cancelling the project. And savings, again, is a very important aspect. If you can actually identify and quantify some of these things, that also might be, again, part of the shock tactic, the shock statistics coming in here. But the key point when you're trying to overcome these kind of situations is don't challenge the person, don't make them feel that they've made a mistake. Challenge the idea and the circumstances around which have developed over the period of time. And that normally enables you to construct a very good, very well-argued logical report that engages the reader, engages the manager with some emotion, explaining you sympathize with what was a good decision at the time. It's not a mistake. Circumstances have changed, so you understand the problem, and then you've got some ways of overcoming it. So again, that gives you an example of some of the things that you need to do. Okay. How do we actually go about making decisions when we don't have a lot of information? What we call rationalization, and decision making is often based on, if it's not our own first-hand experience, then we are asking the readers to make up their own minds. They might not interpret things the way that we actually normally expect them to do. So you need to be able to see courses of action and then provide new evidence that supports it and why it should be followed. And again, justifying and providing the evidence of the decision is what our brains crave. Our brains love to be confirmed to be correct. So this rationalization is all very important. Now, we need evidence, but it's not always there. And one of the other things that's important to bear in mind is what we call loss and reward. We would naturally rather have things than not have things. And generally, we as individuals, the human race, we tend to overvalue what we have, often to the extent that we're blind to future opportunities. So we're generally more afraid to lose something we have than to miss an opportunity to gain. And again, that can help you in phraseology in your writing to try to point out what actually you're going to lose as opposed to what you're going to gain. So that's another important aspect. And this loss and reward has a variety of hierarchies. You may well be familiar with the terminology. A bird in the hand is worth more than two in the bush. And this is very much a case, again, from back in the days when we were evolving as a species, where if we caught a rabbit and somebody along came, two rabbits tomorrow, and said, look, I'll swap you your rabbit today, and I promise to give you two rabbits tomorrow, chances are you'll say, no, I'm going to eat the rabbit I've just caught. I might be able to go and collect my own tomorrow. You might not come back with your two anyway. So again, it's about this loss aversion that we have as a society. So we try to avoid making an immediate loss, and we'd rate that higher than achieving an immediate gain. We're also considering about avoiding future losses, and again achieving a future gain. These things are kind of like the hierarchy in these 4 bullet points. We also can link these to something we call the framing effect, and the framing effect is essentially putting forward information in the light we would like our reader to actually understand it and see it in. What I mean by that is, take for example somebody who's been tasked to make a video of a housing estate. And there's 2 sets of people making these video documentaries. One team has been told, we want you to sell this as the nicest place to live on the planet. And the other team, we want this to be the most horrible place on the planet. Same place that they're going to be videoing. And one team goes in on a beautiful sunny day, children playing on the equipment, lots of people happy, wandering around, beautiful looking building. And that creates a very positive effect. Now the other team, the documentary team that was told you've got to make it look like a horrible place, they choose a rainy, wet, miserable day in London. They turn up at this place, there's nobody playing on the play equipment, they're taking some close-ups of bits of broken play equipment, they found some graffiti on one of the walls, and they've taken a photograph of a stairwell which is full of litter. Again, same place, but you framed them very differently. One very positively, one very negatively. And again, that's something that you can use in your writing to actually get the message across. You are selectively providing the information to the reader so that you are creating that emotional response that you're actually wanting. Now, in terms of other influences on decision making, if we don't actually have the knowledge ourselves to make a decision, we very often use the experience of others. This is something we call social proof. And that comes down to things like evidence, experience, conformity, and aspiration. If we take these individually, if you haven't experienced something firsthand, you essentially are going to rely on others who provide that experience and feed you back the result. Now, how much you trust that evidence from other people is going to be basically on whether you actually trust them themselves and the level of experience they have. If you're asking for directions in a strange town, you probably aren't going to run up to a 9-year-old person and say, where do I need to go for this? You generally look around for what you think are more older, more senior people who probably look like they've been there a long time and can make a more informed decision. So that's really what we mean by experienced. Then we look for conformity. We don't actually like making decisions which are against the flow of everybody else. And I see this all the time when I'm doing training. It's quite often the case I'll ask people to put their hands up if they agree or disagree with something. And you'll see people looking around the room to see who puts their hand up and who doesn't before they decide to put their own hand up. So this is, again, conformity coming through. And then aspiration. If there's somebody that you admire or you have as a role model and they are recommending something, you also aspire very often to be like your idol. Celebrity endorsements continually exploit this particular characteristic, whether it be footballers or footballers' wives or singers who are branding perfume or football trainers. Again, most of the time these celebrity endorsements are being picked up by salespeople and used very, very effectively for persuading you to do things that perhaps otherwise you wouldn't normally do. So again, how you can use this in your own writing, it's important to provide references from highly cited sources. Or maybe you've got high-profile researchers who've got the same views as you that you can also put their information in the document as well. Persuading people with popular opinions is also much easier than cutting completely across the grain. Also remember nowadays we've got a lot of power within the social media and the gossip blogger, and rumours can become truth. I was quite horrified the other day. I read something on one of these pop-ups that arose that was a very famous British footballer had been sent to jail. And I tried to find out about this, and it absolutely is not true. I said to my daughter, I said, how can they write this stuff? And she just laughed at me. She said, yes, but this is how they got you interested in it in the first place. So sometimes these rumours become truth, and they can latch you in to basically looking at parts of the internet or documents that you wouldn't normally do or read through. So again, the power of social media is very, very apparent these days. Another aspect is essentially something I want to discuss, which is called the power of three. Three has some kind of magical effect on people. It's sometimes believed because it provides completeness. It enables you to provide truth by association, but it also enables something very powerful called the decoy effect. And this enables you to actually convince something that they would not normally be convinced with. I'll just give you a short example here. And this is taken from an actual study that was conducted in America in a cinema. They basically had two popcorns for sale. They had a small popcorn, $1.50, and they had a large popcorn at $7. And essentially what they were trying to say was, we would like to find out who buys what size popcorn. Now, essentially nearly everybody bought the small popcorn at $1.50 because it seemed to be a much better value. So they then thought, okay, the power of three, let's introduce a decoy. Now, this scenario here, small popcorn $1.50 the same, large popcorn $7, but they'd introduced a medium popcorn at $6.50. Now what this did immediately, it makes the large popcorn look really good value. It's only 50 cents more than the medium popcorn. And surprisingly enough, nearly everybody who went to the cinema that day bought the large popcorn. So again, the power of three in this decoy effect is really very, very powerful. Again, if you can use that in your writing and in the information that you're providing, it can again have very tremendous results. Final few things to bear in mind though. The reader is always right. If they don't make the right decision that you wanted, it's your fault. It's never their fault. Again, it comes down, you've just written symbols on a page, they've interpreted these symbols. So again, be aware of that. Again, a better understanding of the decision-making process and how to use it in your favor will very often help you get the results that you're actually trying to achieve in your writing. So again, very important things to bear in mind. I want to just provide a summary here. Firstly, we've gone through persuasive writing basics. Very important, why are you writing? Who is your audience? And again, remember, reader plus response equals result. Very clear things that you need to establish on your open mind. How do you do this? Tools, ethos, logos, and pathos. You have to have some reason or logic. People have to trust you, what you're saying, and you have to engage emotionally with your reader to get them to do a response. So using emotive language is important. Get personal with you, we, I, and don't forget about trying to construct a story. Story creates interest, and from the interest, then you can begin to get the emotion working on your actual audience. Now, in terms of the decision making, we've gone through a number of things. Primacy, why coming first matters. Consistency, we hate changing our minds, so it's important to have a good first decision. Use of justification and evidence, again, trying to make things simple and available for readers. We don't like loss, and therefore we're actually very loss averse, so again, that's something that we could be using in the decision-making process. Again, outside influences, we very often will be influenced by people who have other experiences and following the herd. Again, bear in mind the power of three is very important. You'll notice most politicians will state things as 3 specific points, again, using this power of 3. And of course, your reader is always going to be right. Now, I mentioned a little bit at the very beginning about contextualizing this. I want to run through now the last few slides relating to how, if you're doing research document or proposal writing for research grants, how you actually capture and use some of this information. First thing is, we mentioned know your audience. If you're applying for European funding, then clearly your European Commission evaluators are going to be your primary audience. So you need to find out as much as you can about them. Most of the time your audience is going to be busy, they're going to have a large number of these documents to read, and they're going to skim read them and probably read between the lines. Your audience are going to be smart, they might not necessarily be in the same technical field or scientific discipline that you're actually writing in. The audience is interested in good projects and are looking for good results, not just prettily prepared proposals. Golden rules in terms of how you present your text. Writing clear, simple English is important. Space the text out so it's nice and easy to read, and use paragraphs properly. This again provides a nice breakup on the page. Don't repeat the same text throughout the document because that can get boring. And although bold and underlining can help stress certain aspects, don't go crazy with it because the evaluator might then only read the bits that are in bold and underlined and miss the rest of it. And ideally in your writing, everything should be important and have a purpose. Again, remember, if somebody else thinks it's confusing or unclear, it is. The next thing is to aim for average sentence lengths of 15 to 20 words. I do a lot of reviewing for many, many different cultures and different countries of people. And I find that people from certain countries don't use paragraphs. Their sentences can even be half a page long. And it means that you get lost in the document. It's not available information. Perhaps all this stuff is in there that you need, but you just cannot actually get at it. So useful to vary between long and short sentences to help the flow and make your points punchy. Also, when you're writing the sentences, again, come back to what is my objective for this sentence? Assign one idea per sentence. Don't make them too long and complicated with multiple points. Don't overuse technical jargon or abbreviations unless they're absolutely necessary and you're 100% sure that your evaluators or your readers are going to be familiar with these. Again, as we said before, remember who you're writing for. You're not writing for yourself, you're writing to get a response from that evaluator. And hopefully if it's a research document you're providing, you want them to fund it. Use paragraphs and avoid large blocks of text. I'll give an example of that in a few slides later. It's very important to break the page up and try not to use long words when short ones will do. Not all evaluators will necessarily be in English native speakers, so you have to again make it a little bit easier for them. As I mentioned before, we're trying to use emotive language, so use positive, inspiring language that motivates the readers. Explain how you are solving problems, how you can save money. Again, remember this loss aversion. Try to avoid negative words or what we call uncertain words, and particularly things like could, should, may, possibly. When you're trying to convince somebody to do something, it's not really very good to start saying, well, it might work. You have to be a bit more determined and forceful about, I'm very sure this is the right thing to be doing. Start sentences using connectors to split long ones in two, such as but, so, and because. And also be sure you go back through it and chop out anything that's unnecessary, because brevity really is the basis of clear writing. Make sure you abide by the rules of the layout that you've been offered and told to comply with. Now, if you're writing research grants, you'll have a very specific set of rules. But when you're doing your own emails, again, make sure the key thing is that it's actually readable by people receiving it at the other end. So choose a font that's the right size, not micro font. Also, depending on who you're writing to, make sure that you don't inadvertently insult people. Sometimes I found that one of the documents I actually put an exclamation mark in a comment that I made back, and somebody got very upset saying, why are you shouting at me? So again, be a little bit sensitive about the audience that you're actually responding to and how they might actually interpret what you're saying. It can be very dangerously, if you're writing things a bit too blunt and you don't mean to be rude or anything, sometimes it can be interpreted in that way. Use simple diagrams necessary to clarify your text, and again, tables to prevent figures and data more clearly. So again, you might well have different section headings in a longer proposal, so again, just make sure you abide by these types of things. Again, be visual. Try to make it an attractive thing to read. The first example at the top of the right-hand page here is a very classical example from certain countries that write without paragraphs, long sentences. As you can see, to try to pick out a key piece of information from there is very difficult. The one at the bottom right is a much more appealing thing to read. There's a bit of colour in it, it's spaced out, there's bullet points drawing your attention to things. So that's the kind of impactful writing that we're actually trying to achieve. Bullet points are very powerful things and much underutilized. It enables you to highlight certain parts of what you're doing, breaking things down into simple messages and bite-sized pieces, and it can also, as I say, break the page up and make things a little bit easier to read. So again, very important to start thinking about making key issues with your bullet points. And finally, the last thing I want to really get across to you is try to get somebody to actually read what you've written before you send it, to check all of these things, making sure there's no areas of confusion or no additional information that you need to provide a better understanding. Make sure that your objective is clear and your call to action is clear. If you can't get anybody else to read it for you, read it out loud. And the reason for this is you actually use a different part of your brain when you read it out loud. When you just read through it silently to yourself, you are reading what you think you wrote. When you actually read it out loud, you read what you really did put on the paper. And you will be quite surprised at how many things you think were correct sound rubbish when you read it out loud. So again, just some final things to do to check and review your work. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this brief seminar in terms of persuasive writing, and I shall now hopefully hand you back to your team looking after the seminar. Thank you.
Great, Peter, thank you. That was an excellent presentation. I'm in the process right now myself of writing some journal articles, so this information is going to come in really helpful for myself, and I know it will for our attendees as well. Dami, I'm turning over the controls to you now, so when you're ready.
Hi, Vicky, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you well, and I can see your screen as well.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Just a couple of seconds. Okay. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Vicky, can I start now?
Yes.
Hello, Vicky.
Yeah, yes, can you hear me? Yes, please, you can start now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. And thanks for having me here today. Thanks for being here with us. My name is Dami Pikuda. I'm the program manager of IceNet Africa. Thank you, Dr. Peter, for that very informative session. It's a very wonderful time, and I really think that, and I hope that our applicants and participants have also benefited a lot from it, like I have done. And Vicky, thank you once again for being our host for today. And my last thank you is to Dedoyin. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to present this today. So straight away, I would like to go into a brief overview of the MRP 2018 application process and some of the important highlights that I wish to bring to our applicants. So as you know, our major vision for having the MRP 2018 is to have mentees after we have an application, and then we make a shortlisting, and then after a shortlisting, we select, of course, a few candidates who will be trained, and then our mentors will will make the final selection of the people they wish to mentor. Unfortunately, this was not the case with us when we received these applications. And what do I mean by that? I will say that after the application, we faced a very different reality. And first of all, the application forms we sent out, when we were expecting the applications, we purposely made them in MS Word form, so that applicants will have to submit them in the form of emails, and then they will send emails to us. As you know, whoever gets a mentorship position, the most important communication skill that we require, or that the program requires, will be through email correspondences. And then we wanted to simulate what we will be expecting our mentees, selected mentees, to communicate to our mentors. And when we received these applications, the first thing was that most of the application package did not meet these requirements. They did not meet a lot of the requirements on the application forms. And then when it comes to the email correspondences we received, we had a lot of each surprises. And then we thought in ourselves that, what can we do about this? So the first thing I would highlight will be a sample of the emails we received. So my first category of emails that I would like to show us are the emails that are unprofessional. I believe that we all have taken a lot into account from what Dr. Peter said, and I will just be going through this briefly one more time to really pass the message and let you see what we're talking about. So this sample of emails, and we respect the confidentiality of those mentees, we respect them, and we are only using this for educational purposes. So let's take a look at this. This is an email that was sent to submit an application, and this is just all we can see in that email. So I want you to read that email from your perspective as a mentor, or as someone that is in a position to review an application. And then all you see as an email is my application, hope to hear from you, please. So if we decide to analyze this single email, this one sentence email, I don't know, whatever, no matter the time we take to it, but we can as well, I believe you can agree with me that there are so many factors that are actually wrong with this email. There are no punctuations, there are no salutations, there are no greetings. And you know, this passes a message, a simple message to whoever is reviewing it, to whoever is reading it. It shows that this person is rude. You might not have meant that, but that is the message that the receiver receives, that this applicant is rude. And another sample in that is application form processed. You can see that application form processed, ... anticipating your replies. And then again, we look at ourselves and then we wonder if this person gets a mentor, if this person is assigned to a mentor, and this is the kind of emails that a mentor gets. The only explanation they can give to it is that this is very rude. And if this is rude, it has a major impact on you as being their mentee, because they no longer take you serious. They see you as rude and disrespectful. And then it affects the integrity of our programs. If it's a very extreme mentor, he might just decide to quit the program and say, the mentee that was assigned to him or her is rude and they can no longer communicate. So this is a very huge concern for us that we have to take into account. And then the next category of emails we receive is the one I will class as a poor grammar. You know, Dr. Peter has said a lot about this, and then we understand that a lot of us, English is not our first language, and there's no offense in that. A lot of us, we speak even another official language in our country. But then as long as you have decided to communicate in English, ignorance is not taken as an excuse. That's a slogan that I take into account every time. And when this kind of email comes, no one takes the content serious. No one takes it as important. No matter the quality of your CV, no matter the quality of the content that you're trying to pass across, this kind of emails would totally piss off who is reading it, and then they totally disregard your whatever package that you have put together. And then you begin to wonder, why don't I have responses? Why do they not accept me into this program? Why don't I get this opportunity? It's because your emails totally put them off, and they did not even give you a chance at all. And then the last batch of email, the last category that I will consider when I was preparing this, and I asked myself, what do you call this? That's the title I give it. And I would just like us to take a look at it together. It's a screenshot of an email. And then as you can see, this part I'm showing is a reminder that was sent to an applicant. And then this is the response we received. The person sent an email, "Are you kidding?" with an exclamation mark. If you will be the one to receive this, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the person sending this email or the person receiving this email, and then you get this kind of response. What if this is sent to our professor? What if this is sent to our top-notch professionals who are our mentors? And then you reply them and ask if they are kidding. I don't think they will ever take you ever serious again. You know, we are in the world of social media, and we have the Twitter, and we have the Facebook and Instagram, but it's highly important for us to take very key importance, to attach importance to whatever we communicate via emails, especially if it is for professional or career or academic purposes. And then the next email I'm showing down there is even more interesting. As you can see, this is an email that was sent about this particular webinar holding today. And this person asked, are there any special reasons as to why this particular seminar is on a Saturday? Some of us are staunch Adventists. And you know, as interesting as this may be, this is rather sad for us, because we imagine that this is sent to a mentor. If a mentor fixes a particular meeting time to meet with you and you reply with this email, the first thing we should know is that someone who is non-African may actually have a problem understanding what an Adventist actually means. And then he or she goes ahead to find what it is and realize it has to do with religious activities. This totally puts them off. And you have to know that these people you're communicating with, these are people who have, and we can boldly say and vouch for our mentors. We can say that they are top-notch professionals and top-notch professors in their career. And what this means is that they have a very busy schedule. They are very busy people. They have a lot of activities they have going on with them. And if they try to squeeze out time for you as a mentee, from which you are the one benefiting, not them, and then they fix a meeting, and then this person replies and say, I have a church activity. What does this say about you? What does this say about our program? And then we realize some of these things that, in honesty, some of these emails may not actually mean that maybe you do not know they are wrong. Maybe you're just ignorant. You just feel that you can express your mind. But then these challenges, after looking at all of them, brought us to having a new selection model. And when I mean a new selection model, what we realize is that if we put all of these things in consideration, I will say that more than 85% of the applicants will not even be shortlisted at all. But then if we do that, we can still achieve our aims of finding the few mentees, the few applicants who are qualified, and going ahead to train them and going ahead to assign them to mentors. But then there's a gap. There are still this 85% that were not qualified, but they do not know why they're not qualified. And this 85% will still keep sending applications, other applications elsewhere, and will still keep applying to more opportunities, and they will not get replies, and they will not know why. So that brings us to this. What do we do? Do we just ignore this 85% and just let them go and sort themselves out? Or do we see how we can actually address it? And this brings us to the fact that we decided to shortlist more applicants. And when we shortlist more, it's what are the opportunities? How does it benefit you as an applicant to have been shortlisted? It means that for those that were shortlisted, they are majorly people who have submitted a complete application. It might have been in the right format or not, but the application was complete, and they have shown interest in our thematic areas, which is sustainable energy, environment, sustainability, renewable energy, and climate change. And so we believe that this training, and more so, a webinar training that can serve 100 people can serve 500 people. So why not just give them the chance and let them see, and particularly this webinar we have today, they have opportunities to see areas where they can improve, especially in their research communication. And then the MRP team decided that, okay, the last benefit they will have is that every applicant who has taken part in all webinars will receive a letter of participation or a certificate of participation. As an evidence, it can be counted as a capacity building education program or training program, and then you can have something to hold on to after these trainings. And please note, you do not have to send an email for this certificate, and the MRP team will contact everyone who has attended all webinars, and they will do this at a later date, which they do not have now. So I'm not able to communicate that to you at this point. And then how does it benefit our vision at ICEND Africa? Our vision is empowering African young researchers. So we can see that aside having mentees at the end of the day who are networked and matched with mentors, we are also able to train more people. We are also able to have them improve and see areas that they need to improve on, especially in the areas of research communication and seeking research opportunities. And so in the next couple of slides, I will be reviewing the major parts of the application model that we considered. And the first one is effective email communication. I am not going into much details of this because Dr. Peter already did a good justice to this. But I will just highlight a few things that we noted from the applications we received. And the first is the use of a formal email address. And as you can see, I put it here, you want to use a formal email address, not babyforlove@yahoo.com. We received emails that are similar to this. And then when this kind of emails come to someone, to a professional you're seeking an opportunity with, they don't even open it. And most likely to go into spam, because these are emails that are used by spammers. And then the question you keep asking yourself, I did not get a feedback, my application was not considered. It's because no one even checked your application. And another important thing that I want to mention quickly, which we noted, is that maybe some people do not know that your emails have your name attached to them. And then when you have emails that bear a name, and then you're sending application under another name. For instance, your name in your application is Peace Uzondu, and then on your Gmail, you use Ashante Joy. You know, I'm just coming up with random names now, and whatever name. And then when this happens, when the person wants to search, when they are trying to trace your application, they try to link your name from the emails you send, they do not have a trace of it. And, you know, we have emails, we can have emails for personal lives, but even if it is a single email that you will attach to your for your career purpose or for academic purposes, have an email that that has a formal email address, and stick to it and make sure you label it correctly. And then the next thing is that you pay attention to details. I have an example here of an email that was sent, and my name was not well written. You know, if this goes to just picture you being a mentor or a professional professor, and then this is a student that is applying for a position with you or funding or scholarship, and they did not even pay enough attention to spell your name right. So you just tell them you don't pay attention to details, you're clumsy, and they don't even check whatever you have sent, no matter how good your email is, no matter how good your proposal is. No one even checks them. And then the third example I want to use is use spell checks if necessary. Dr. Peter has already talked about all of that. But then I'm wondering, maybe you do not know, but there are online resources that you can use to do spell checks. There are spell checks that are free online. You just copy whatever you have written, you paste it in it, and it just helps you. It just points out all your spelling mistakes. You know, this is an email that was sent, and instead of, as you can see, instead of a best regards, I suppose, there's a beast regards. And then when this comes to someone reviewing an application, I don't think it will go further, except the very kind-hearted ones. And then with all of this, you can see that this is just about your email now. No one has even talked about your file, whatever file you've attached. No one has ever talked about how intelligent you are, about how good your CV is, about how good your CGPA is. So at this point, it's very possible that you've already lost the chances because they did not even check it at all. So what are the tips that can be helpful? Be polite. I'll just go over these briefly. Be polite, and then name your documents. Yes, so when we're talking about naming your document, if you're attaching documents, it's especially for application positions like the one you did with ICENET Africa, and then you just put yourself in the position of a reviewer, of a team of reviewers that they need 100 people. And then they receive 500 applications and maybe 500 attached documents. And then they download everything. And when they download everything, they realize that 400 people actually name their files and say, okay, Dami Pikuda transcript, Adedoyin, Bayo transcripts, Joy transcripts. And then there are these 100 candidates who just wrote transcripts. And so everything is just a duplicate of transcripts. You know, the first thing is that they need 100 people, right? And they have 400 who already have made the job easier for them. So it's just easy for them to just discard the remaining 100 rather than sitting down and opening the form one by one and trying to name the file for you. You know, this is not injustice. This is not being fair. This is just about them working effectively because they have a deadline too. So when you send applications, when you send documents, try and have them named. It makes it easier. Like Dr. Peter said, take pity on whoever is going to be viewing your application. Make the job as easy as possible for them. Then another point I want to make, allow sufficient time for replies. You should understand that you are the one, it could be an emergency for you. It could be an emergency to know the decision. It could be an emergency to be sure they've read your email, but give them time. They're not just thinking about you. You're not the only one applying to them. And then when you bombard them with too many reminders, you should know that it appears to them you're being rude. It appears to them you're shouting on them. And if it's someone really busy and doesn't have time, it might just block off your emails. For an example, we received a couple of emails recently, and then there was one particular person. The same email, it was being sent like every 3 hours, just copying and pasting and sending again, copying and pasting. And then when if you're sending that, and then we put again in our shoe, we put our mentors in our shoes. What if this is sent to a mentor? And then the mentor doesn't reply your email just because they didn't reply in the next few hours, and then you keep copying and pasting and sending to them again. You send it like 5 times in a day. The next thing the mentor will do will probably just to block you off because it sees you are rude. And then what does that do to our program? It brings down the integrity. It makes us lose mentors, and and then you have blocked the opportunity for other mentees who will have benefited from the program. And then keep your communication short and professional. Dr. Peter has talked about that. And then convince your reader that you're proactive. I have a couple of examples here. When I mean proactive, you are a researcher, right? As far as this audience, we're treating everyone as a researcher. And that means there's a word search in your title. There's a research. So you should be able to make findings and find things. It's okay not to know everything. It's okay. No one knows everything. But then be eager to learn. Convince the person you're dealing with that you're eager to learn. This I'm going to show a sample email. This is an email that was sent to us about the webinar after we sent information about webinar. And then this person, I'm not going to read all the email because of time. You can read it from your end. And then this person is talking about how to attend the webinar, how to get visa, and how to cover the cost of travel. This tells whoever is reviewing your application just one thing. It passes the message that you are lazy. It passes the message that you did not take time to even go check the meaning of a webinar. And the same internet you use to send this this email, you would have even used less time to just type webinar on Google and find the answer. And when this happens, you don't send an email to these people and expect the person to start trying to reply you and explaining what a webinar is. That doesn't show you as a good learner. That doesn't show you as, it doesn't portray you as a diligent, intelligent person that's willing to learn and know more. And another example I will give is a couple of applicants were asked for additional documents, and then it was specified to be 6 lines of type per inch. And then this person sends an email to ask for the meaning. I received this email and I was wondering, I understand what that means, but this is not a one-to-one conversation. How do I explain that to that person? And I will not take use of my time. There are times to attend to other things. And I just wondered, this person could just have typed those 6 words in Google and just find the answer. I will share a very brief example with you about a personal experience. The first time I realized this was I had a professor, and then there was something I was trying to find, and then I just shot the professor an email, and I just said, I'm having problem trying to understand this. And it's not even a word, it's a very complex thing, and I just said, I'm having problem understanding this. And my professor replied me and said, I did not know, check Google. The same time, I felt, I don't know how I felt, but I did not feel intelligent at that point, because I could have searched Google. Although that particular example I'm talking about, we actually did not find the solution in Google because it was a trade secret. But telling me that just tells me the state of the professor's mind. Like, really, I want you to search, show me that you are intelligent. And this applies to anything. If you're sending emails and then you don't want to portray yourself as less intelligent than you are. And then all this section now, everything we've been talking about is just about your email. It's just about the avenue you're using to communicate. Now, nobody's talking about even your file. Nobody's talking about your GP. Nobody's talking about the interesting research you're doing, because you have even blocked your opportunity for them to go into that and check. And then I want to say at this point that this webinar or this training or this session is not aimed at judging or castigating. It's not aimed to make you feel less intelligent. And for all the samples we've used, is not to make anyone feel they are for educational purposes. But then we are trying to make you see the gap here. We are trying to make you see that if you want to make your research work more to get international audience, these are the things you have to look at. We understand that Africans generally, we did not maybe have a good experience of using emails at a very young age. And okay, maybe we do not have much of this experience, but then we have 2 choices at this point. It's either we sit down and say, I do not know how to do this. No one taught me how to do this. And you just sit and remember where you are. Or we decide to step up our game and take it by our own efforts and decide to improve in these areas if we really want to make ourselves of international relevance and compete globally. So how to draft a sample email, I'll just go over this. There should be a salutation, and not emails. We received emails with LODS. I mean, LODS, you're sending to someone, and then you're sending LODS, someone you haven't met before, someone you haven't communicated with before, and then you put LODS. It's rude. No one takes that kind of email important. And then when you're writing to people search for their titles, it is rude when they have a title and you do not use it in addressing them. Avoid exclamation marks. Avoid capital letters. This is just like you're shouting on them. And then this is a sample of an email received, and this person sends an email and says, dear founder, and then puts the name of the organization and puts the address and puts, you don't need all of this. I mean, there are a lot of resources online that you can make use of to learn how to write email professionally, and I will encourage that you do that. And you just have to know, this is just like what you would do if you're writing a letter, not an email. So try and make use of an opportunity, make use of internet. You don't need to pay anyone. Just try and equip yourself with these skills if you see that one of these areas you're lacking in them. And then I just change this email. I just say, Dr. Peter said that, I put the title, I'm writing, go straight to the point. Tell me what, whoever is reviewing, let them know why you're writing. Give a greeting at the end of it. And see, all of this now, we're not even talking about your content yet. So the way the email works is just like when you're going for a job interview And then you have the best GP there, you have the work experience, you have a brilliant CV. But then the first thing the recruiter looks at is your dressing, it's your appearance. If you look shabby, I just doubt if they will pay attention to whatever you have to say. That is what the emails is serving now. The world is revolving around. There are a lot of conferences that are happening online. There are a lot of proposals you're submitting, there are a lot of scholarships. You apply for a lot of opportunities, and the key thing you use is your email tool. You have to empower yourself. And then the next thing I will go through now will be the concept notes. Yes, remember that we asked for concept notes in the application form. And then when we mean a concept note, what we said was something very brief. And then you wonder, what do you need a concept note for? It could be for research funding. It could be a seeking industrial partnership. And in this case, it's something very similar to seeking potential supervisors. So when you want to write a concept note, Dr. Peter, thank you for the session. I believe you have spoken a lot about this. You want to let them know, you want to pass a message. And then I put this briefly, that when you're writing, in this case, you're seeking a potential a supervisor, and you're wanting to be a mentor to you. And then you're saying you have to include all these sessions. There has to be a background. There has to be a missing gap in literature. There has to be the objectives. There has to be a methodology. And then you have to let the person know the relevance to existing literature. We have a lot of email of the concept notes that we're just talking about the background. When you talk about renewable energy background, okay, all of this, and then the last sentence, you're just saying you want to do this. It's not sufficient for the mentor to know about what you're doing. He doesn't even know the objectives. It doesn't even pass a message about your methodology. So how sure are you that this methodology is what is applicable to what he needs? How sure, if it's even for a potential supervisor or scholarship, you have not told him, convinced him that you have the methodology, or you have considered the methodology that he wants. So these things that you should put, and like this, like I would say, this applies to a lot of other kind of research writing, proposal writing. Even if you're submitting journal applications, these are very important. And if I will pass a few comments on the concept notes we received. I avoid being too technical, and you have to know your audience, just like Dr. Peter said. In this case, you're sending concept notes to, you should know that the concept notes will first be reviewed by MRP team, right? And then MRP team will review. When they don't understand what you're saying, how do they know where to pass it to? So in a lot of applications and a lot of admissions, if you're seeking a PhD or your postdoc or something, when it's too technical for the person at the other end to read, he's not able to make the best decision. And that may not be in your favor. And then make each section proportional. Don't use all the pages about your literature review. Talk about every section that is important in any research writing. And then tell a story. Even one thing I usually do that I think can be helpful is that when you have a concept note like that and you're sending to someone who's not an expertise, have a colleague, have a friend who is not working on your research to just read about it. And let them tell you, let them pass a non-biased comments if they understand what you're saying or not. If they do not understand, that means you have to probably work on it a little more. So try to make sure you are passing a message. If they don't understand, it doesn't mean it's not brilliant. It doesn't mean it's not a brilliant idea. It's just that it's not suitable for their audience. Then adherence to word limits. For the concept notes, in cases where you have they have asked you to write 200 to 400 words. As a PhD student, you do not write 50 words. As a master's student, you do not write. When you write less than that, it only tells them that you don't even understand what you're doing to that level. If you cannot write 200 words about your research, then how do you convince someone to be your supervisor or to support it or to fund it? We received a lot of concept notes that were just 2 sentences. And then with those 2 sentences, we wonder if this person doesn't know what he or she is doing at this point. And then it's difficult for us to just say, okay, we will. And unfortunately, I must say that the quality of a lot of the concept notes we received, they were too poor that we would be ashamed of ourselves to forward them to our mentors, because we know the caliber of proposals they will review. We know the caliber of writings they must have been experienced with. And then we face these challenges, and then you wonder if you submit an application, whether to Iceland or to anywhere else, and then you say they did not get back to you or you were not selected. These are a lot of the factors that they look at and they use to make their decision. And then the next thing I want to talk about is academic referees. So there are a lot of, there are different types of referees, but when it's for academic purposes, they expect you to be an academic referee. And when we mean an academic referee, it means someone that can attest to your academic performance or to your research performance. And who can be your referee? It could be your lecturer. He has taught you courses, you've written exams for him. And then it could be your departmental advisor. He has access to all your grades and he knows how you're performing. And then it could be even your research supervisor, most preferably. And then we received a couple of samples of who cannot be. I will show shortly. Who may not be suitable. So who may not be suitable for academic referees? Maybe your LinkedIn connection. If you're submitting an academic application and then as a reference, excuse me, you put a LinkedIn connection, you're telling the person, a LinkedIn connection is someone you meet via LinkedIn, right? And so that person doesn't even know about you. And that person doesn't even know how you're doing your exams. He didn't grade your exams. He didn't read your writing. He wasn't one supervising your research. You don't put your cousins, you don't put your pastors. And this is not about exaggerating. We received a lot of referees, of people that referees were in this format. This is an example, as you can see, the relationship was there. And then there's a second example, so cousin and LinkedIn network. And I would say that no organization that's considering your application for anything would consider any of these people. And in that case, your application doesn't even get to it doesn't even get through the first sorting stage. And another rule of thumb when you're applying for academic referees, it is most likely preferred that you use institutional organizational email addresses. Because, for instance, ISNET would not contact any referee whose email address that has been provided is Gmail or Yahoo.com. Because we all know this can be created. You can just create the address yourself. So for generally, the institutions, organizations that are reviewing applications, especially for academic references, will prefer organizational institutional email addresses. So this is about my last slide. And the message I'm passing is that no requirement is irrelevant. And so when I say, when there's a requirement on an application and then you have to fill it, none of them is irrelevant. For instance, one example I like to give is about the proper CGPA definition. So when you have to submit, you're filling an application and they're asking for your CGPA. Do you just put 3.5 or you put 3.5 over 4.0? In the first case, if you put a 3.5, you do not know which person is reviewing this. You do not know the scale they use. If for instance, if your institution used 3.5 over 4, and you submitted an application and you just wrote 3.5, and the institution reviewing your application actually uses 3.5 out of 7. So he or she may be right to assume that you meant 3.5 over 7, and that means you're just an average student, whereas your 3.5 over 4 is actually a first-class grade. So you would cause yourself to lose opportunities, and you don't expect them to start searching and start trying to type your name and trying to find the name of your school. And no, they do not have time to do this. Reviewers have a lot of other things. They have deadlines to meet as well. And so in this way, just by not writing your CGPA correctly, you have already shot yourself in the leg by losing that opportunity. And then the next thing is following formatting instructions. I must say when we required the formats for the MRP 2018 applications, we asked for PDF and MS Word. And maybe we can say that a couple of applicants, not a couple, a very good percentage do not even know why we wanted PDF. Some people submitted just PDF, some people submitted just MS Word. And if you ask me, if we were to judge by what our standard of application is, in that situation, those applicants are not even considered, should not even be considered at all. That might seem hard, that might seem harsh, but I will go ahead and give an example of what that means, or of why institutions or organizations or schools may ask for specific formats. Now, there are softwares that analyze all this data. If you're submitting, if an institution is receiving 500 applications, those applications are not being reviewed by hand. If you're submitting, if they want PDF, that means they're working with a software that can only analyze PDF data. And so if, for instance, if you have an application you are reviewing and then there are 500 applicants, and then say 450 of them already submitted in the right format, will you rather work with that with the 450, or you will say you want to help those that were not in the right format to convert to the right format? You can see that you won't be maximizing your time if you have to sit down and start converting for people. And even more interestingly, there are some formats there are some softwares that can only analyze MS Word data. For instance, VBA will only work with MS Word data. And that means if you submit a PDF file, it's even more difficult to convert a PDF to MS Word. And so in that case, if their application, their package, their data analyzing package can only work with MS Word, that means they will not get to your application at all. And then you wonder, why were you not selected? So for instance, I'll give an example. I'm a grader in university, and then when we grade assignment, there are strict rules that whoever does not submit a PDF format gets a grade of 0. That may seem hard, but I'll take 1 minute to explain why we do that. Because for grading, we use a particular software that will download automatically all their submissions, all their PDF submissions. We will grade with that software, and once you're done with grading, it automatically sends it back to them. So that means whoever submitted in any other format, the software doesn't detect it, and we do not know. Except the other alternative will be for us to start doing it one by hand and be sorting out who does this, who does that. You can see that this is not maximizing whatever we have to do. And so, like Dr. Peter said, take pity on people who are revising your applications. Take pity on them and just submit in the right format. It's better for you. It's better for them. We had applications where the applicants actually scanned one page, one by one of the application as images and send them to us. And then you wonder, if we are doing every other thing by software, do we have to sit down with that 1 or 2 persons or 3 persons and start helping them to extract data? How would you extract data from a JPEG information to convert to PDF? So if you put yourself in the shoes of those that are on the other end, you realize that a lot of these things, when you do not get feedback from applications, it's actually not their fault. It is because you have not paid attention to enough details. And then adherence to deadline instructions, I believe we're familiar with that. We should you should know that those people reviewing your application also have deadlines. For instance, when you send your application to us, we have teams that are working on these things, and we send it to them, and then they work on it. They use software, they work on it, and then when it comes in late, no one touches it. The last thing I found out that we are not familiar with is e-signature. We need to know that there are a lot of methods now to sign electronically. When you see them, you do not ignore them. When you ignore your e-signature, it tells them that you have not signed, you have not signed, and that means that they cannot take anything that has been submitted. And finally, I just want to wrap up on this. This is the last slide. We realize that a lot of PhD and even MSc candidates do not have any volunteering experiences. I do not want to go into these details, but you can just search more about this. Why do you need volunteering activities? What kind of activities can you participate in? And on this note, I will say thank you for your attention, and if there are any questions.
Hi, Dami. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, your enthusiasm is amazing, and thank you so much for that really great presentation. So let me pull my screen back up once more, and we can launch into some Q&A. And I do apologize, we did go over, but these presentations were so very good. I just really want to say thank you to both Dr. Peter and to Dami for their outstanding presentations. And so now we're going to shift to the Q&A session. We did go over, so we should probably limit our Q&A session to 15 minutes or so. We have far more questions that came in than we have time to answer, but I will be sending the questions that we aren't able to get to out to our presenters so that they can address them subsequent to the completion of the webinar and can work on those, and then we can email the responses out to those who presented the questions. So I think right now I'll just go ahead and launch into the Q&A. I will pull up the questions and begin. And Peter, I'll present the first question to you as soon as I can undock this from my station. And can you hear me okay? I'm assuming, I hope so.
Yes, I'm unmuted.
Okay, great. All right, so Peter, the first question to you is about cognitive dissonance. All right, let me try that again. Sorry, about cognitive dissonance. I don't know why I'm having trouble pronouncing that word. What should be the best way for a mentee to manage his or her weaknesses in front of a mentor?
Yeah, that's a very good and quite a complex question, actually. I always take the view that you're trying to create a relationship between a mentee and a mentor. And we go back into effective communication fundamentals here, which is based on trust. So I feel the very best way in this particular circumstance is to recognize if there is some cognitive bias going on, and to certainly be aware of that yourself and make yourself more aware of your decision making, perhaps doing slightly different things, but also explain that all to your mentor as well, because I think the more that they understand each other, the mentee and the mentor, then the less these things are likely to affect in the long term. I mean, the good thing is that everybody suffers from cognitive dissonance. We all have an opinion and we don't like changing it, and this is very, very human. It's one of our features. So it shouldn't come as a big surprise if you happen to disagree with somebody. Try to explain why you disagree, but try to do it in as diplomatic and sensitive way as possible. Again, you're trying to convince somebody either to come away to your way of thinking, or maybe even for you to persuade yourself to change your own mind and adopt somebody else's way of thinking. So it's all about being aware of cognitive dissonance. Whether it's a problem or not, it's really genuinely down to how you actually handle it. I hope that's not too evasive a question, but honesty, discussion often helps solve these problems.
Right. No, that's great. Thank you so much. Dami, I'm going to present the next question to you. And this, because this topic came up quite frequently in the questions that were asked. And it's regarding, speaking. So say you are a good writer and you can communicate well through your written words, but you may not be the best public speaker. How can you translate your well-written message that you put into words in front of a crowd? How do you improve public speaking skills around your writings?
Thank you, Vicky. The first thing I will say is that no one starts as a good speaker. Actually, everyone starts actually by practicing and devoting time to it and paying attention to what you need to learn. So it's something you can build and you can work on. And the fact that you're actually a good writer, that should be a bonus, because most of your conversations or whatever you're gonna do, especially internationally, you have to start it off by writing. So I believe that it's even easier, or maybe a lot, you can pay more attention to learning how to speak and just boost up with time. I don't know if I answered that question right.
No, I think that's great. And Peter, or even Adedoyin, do either of you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, let me just add something quick to that. Most speaking engagement that are formal, you're going to know ahead of time, and then you know the content. So many times, prepare your presentation, even if it's just a speech or a call, prepare what you want to say, and then you can repeat it to yourself a number of times, and then it's going to help your final presentation.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think, you know, I'll just add, I just say practice, practice, practice. It's often sometimes even intimidating to be, public speaking is a great fear for many, myself included. And it's just taken, the more you practice, the more comfortable you are and able to deliver your message. So I just thought I'd add that. That's been the key for me to improving my speaking skills. And just wanted to share that. Peter, next question is for you. First of all, you were highly complimented on your presentation. It was very insightful and in depth. But the question is, can you please help me with a further clarification on the R plus R equal R equation? Now the reader reads my work and gives his or her response based on their understanding of what they have read. How does the response lead to my result from a project I undertook with the scientific data? So a little confusion there. And I don't know if that question was clear enough, but
yeah, I kind of understand the question. It's a thread that's come through a number of the questions I've been looking at, where there needs to be very much more focus on the audience. Who are you actually writing for? And there is a big disparity if you're writing for an academic audience, basically to provide your research results. This is a completely different style and branch of writing. You're not really there to persuade anybody as such. You're there from an ethical standpoint, providing genuine results that you've genuinely done your best to interpret as honestly as possible. So academic writing is a very much different category. And most of the time people get trained, particularly from the research environment, of course, in writing for academics. So you are presenting information in a clear and logical fashion. So you normally start out with what you were trying to achieve, the experimental methodology, your results, your analysis of the results, your conclusions, and then very often you'll have a series of recommendations that will follow on from that. But at the end of the day, you're in a way writing for yourself. You're trying to promote yourself as, hey, I've done some great research and I really want to do more of this stuff because I'm getting quite good at it. Please cite me so that my standing in my peer community will increase. If, however, you're writing for a different non-academic audience, and most of the time you're either writing because you want to convince an evaluator to fund you, a bank manager to give you a loan, or somebody to provide you with information that you require, then your audience is not really from that same community with that same mindset. And your job is slightly different in those types of circumstances. Now, in those particular cases, it's down to who exactly am I trying to get a response from. So your R plus R equals R in an academic environment really doesn't work because you're not expecting any response. You don't really want an emotional engagement with your audience because it could be hundreds of people reading your paper. When you are specifically writing to somebody for some particular response, then the R plus R will work very effectively because you have an objective. You're writing for a reason. I want to get something. I want this person to do something. And that's basically when the R plus R is going to work effectively. Okay. Does that clarify?
Yeah, I think that's an outstanding answer. Thank you very much for that. Just a couple more, and we're losing people, so I want to, again, apologize for going over, but it's such an important topic. Dami, the next question is for you. Actually, a couple of questions, sort of short answers. When writing the concept note, is it possible to put the methodology in a flowchart format due to page constraints and things like that?
Yes, if you're writing and then you have to pass a lot of information, just like Dr. Peter has shown us, graphical information actually helps a lot, or anything tabular for your reader to really grasp quickly the message you're trying to pass across. So yes, I agree, except in cases where there has been specific instructions that you do not put tables in. That is in rare cases anyways, but I've seen them. So in the exception of that, I think it's a good idea, and it's really even effective for you to use a graphical or tables or graphical data, or to use graphs or tables, pardon me, and then you use them to pass the information across.
Terrific, thank you. And this is the next question back to you again, Dami. It's very short. Is it okay to address in an email, dear sir or madam, if you're not sure of who the recipient is, and if you're not aware of their title?
Yes, yes. So I will say that in Africa we are more familiar with a dear sir or dear ma. But see, in this case, what I will suggest is that try as much as possible to find the name of the person. For instance, if it's someone that their names can be available online, or they are, maybe they have a website, or you can have access to their names, it's just a lot more preferable, because it makes it more personal, and then they know that that email is for them. It attaches that to whatever you're saying, and it makes them give attention to it. This, in my opinion, on this part of the world, actually makes it look more random, more like you're just sending some random emails. But in the case where you cannot find their names or their titles, their sir or ma is perfectly fine.
Great. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Again, so many questions, and they just keep coming in. At this point, I would just like to, I think, wrap up the webinar. And again, thank you to our outstanding panelists for their information and providing these great answers during this informative Q&A session. Again, for any questions we didn't have time to get to, we will connect with those attendees offline after the webinar and try to address all of the questions, so that we are able to provide answers for some of these some of the barriers and challenges that you face as you perform your writing. So now with that, I'd just like to provide Peter and Dami with an opportunity to offer any additional or final remarks you'd like to make before we close the webinar.
Well, from my perspective, I'd just like to wish everybody a lot of success with this program. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for people. Communication is vital, and really trying to improve the way one writes, I think, is a very good objective, because unfortunately we can't meet everybody we would like to face to face. Okay. Thank
you. Dami?
Just to wrap it up, I would like to say that this presentation was not to judge or to castigate or to make anyone feel less intelligent. However, we want us to see the gaps we need to fill. And then we understand that there are limited resources, especially in Africa. I had a very good further education in Africa. We know the challenges we're facing, but then I would like to say, to wrap it up, that it takes us to build us. It takes us to become a better us. So we need to just get beyond those limitations. We need to just get beyond those challenges if we really want to make good progress, especially in our research career. Thanks.
Thank you. And I would definitely be remiss if Adedoyin, I didn't offer you a moment to offer some final remarks as well.
Thank you very much, Vicky. I think the two speakers, Dr. Peter, thank you very much, and Damilola, thank you. They have really done justice to some of the things that we set as objectives for this webinar. But I would like to re-emphasize the last statement Dami made to our applicants. You see, I understand what you're talking about. Somebody was asking about challenge with internet connections. Somebody wrote us asking about how you would fly to America to attend webinar, all of this. Yes, while we are striving to help ourselves to develop in Africa, we must first acknowledge our challenge and see how we can go about them. But a message like Dami also said, I had my BSc and my master's in Africa as well. I know sometimes I will have to go to very difficult areas just because I have a Skype meeting. Sometimes somewhere close to the bush. Just because I want to, nobody will understand you to say you have a meeting with somebody in World Bank, you have a meeting with somebody in Harvard University, and you are saying, I'm sorry, I cannot make it because of my internet connection. So we must, like Damian said, break the barriers. And on a general perspective, let's note that we are not competing with our classmates. We are competing across the globe with people that have better opportunities, that have better exposure. So it takes extra strive to be able to beat them on the global scale. So with the, like Dami said, last thing from me, we would have probably this webinar would have been for 50 people. I mean the three webinars, but we just discovered from our findings that really we need to enlarge the scale. So, and then we broke the selection into stages such that we are able to select more people at the beginning, train them so that more people can at least benefit before we are now able to select the few that our capacity can take for the mentoring program. So thank you very much. Join us on Facebook, join us on Twitter, join us on LinkedIn. We share a number of opportunities, scholarships, and fellowship and things like that. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you again. So with that, on behalf of the Clean Energy Solutions Center and ISNAD Africa, I'd like to extend a very hearty thank you to Dr. Sheard and to Ms. Pikuda, to our partner, ISNAD Africa, and to all of you, our attendees, for participating in today's webinar. We really very much appreciate your time and hope that you return receive very valuable insights. I would like to offer you a reminder that we will send you a web link to the recording. It will be posted to our YouTube channel. And of course, PDFs of the presentations you saw today, we'll send those by email. It will come from me in approximately 1 week. It takes a little bit of time to process the recording, so it'll be about 1 week or less before you receive that. Also, to let you know, you may access other valuable webinar recordings at the Clean Energy Solutions Center YouTube channel. We've provided the link for that on this slide. And finally, I would like to kindly ask you to take a moment to complete the short survey that will appear when we conclude the webinar. And with that, please enjoy the rest of your weekend. This concludes our webinar.